Well, good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson tonight. If you tuned in to see the hearing in the Senate Armed Services Committee today, and if you didn't, you missed out, but if you did, you may have been a little surprised to see Mark Milley sitting there. You remember Milley? He's the fleshy, hood-eyed man who's the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He is also a national disgrace. He's a living insult to the military he oversees. That's not invective. It's not an insult. It's objectively true. And yet somehow, despite the overwhelming evidence that Mark Milley is dishonest, incompetent, partisan, dishonorable, Mark Milley still has a highly prominent job. That's the amazing thing. And not only is Mark Milley still employed at the very highest level, he is still lying, and doing so with his characteristic relish and enthusiasm. Today, for example, with an entirely straight face, Mark Milley delivered an impassioned lecture about the importance of civilian control of the military. Quote, "This country doesn't want generals figuring out what orders we're going to accept or do or not. That's not our job." Oh, really? Is that so, Mark Milley? Isn't this the same Mark Milley who once illegally seized personal control of our country's nuclear arsenal? And then when that wasn't sufficient, promised to tip off the government of China about future American military operations. And did all of this because he didn't like his boss, who, unlike him, was, yes, a civilian, elected by voters. Yep, that's the very same Mark Milley, the one lecturing you today about civilian control of the military. It was all pretty amusing in a dark way, but it did make you wonder, what is this about? Why is Mark Milley saying something so obviously preposterous? It's got to be helping him in some way. And indeed, it was helping him. What you watched in the Senate hearing today was pure blame shifting. Joe Biden's foreign policy is a legitimate disaster. Nobody disputes that. But Mark Milley wants you to know that none of it is his fault. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin wants you to know that too. So does the head of Central Command, General McKenzie. All three of them want to make it crystal clear that the senile guy in the White House did this. It's his fault, not theirs. It was Joe Biden, they told us today, who forced American troops to leave Afghanistan before we evacuated all American citizens. And because the Pentagon reflexively, in every case, follows every order to the letter from the sitting president, they had no choice but to obey these crazy decisions. Watch them explain.
General Milley, it's your testimony that you recommended 2,500 troops approximately stay in Afghanistan?
Yes, my assessment was back in the fall of 20, and it remained consistent throughout, that we should keep a steady state of 2,500, and it could bounce up to 3,500, maybe something like that.
General McKenzie, do you share that assessment?
Senator, I do share that assessment.
President Biden last month in an interview with George Stephanopoulos said that no military leader advised him to leave a small troop presence in Afghanistan. Did these officer and General Miller's recommendations get to the president personally?
Their input was received by the president and considered by the president, for sure. In terms of what they specifically recommended, Senator, as they just said, they're not going to provide what they recommended in confidence.
Are you following this? Wheels officially coming off, but whoa, what sleazeballs these guys are. We told Joe Biden to keep 2,500 troops in the country. We demanded it. On the other hand, because we are bound by the ancient and sacred rules of confidentiality, we can't really tell you what we told the president because that would be wrong. These people so thoroughly deserve each other. It is wonderful to see them rat one another out, which is exactly what they proceeded to do for the entirety of today's hearings. Watch General McKenzie explain that despite the fact that he personally oversaw the disaster in Afghanistan, actually, he had nothing to do with it. It was all demented grandpa pulling the strings from the White House.
I won't share my personal recommendation to the president, but I will give you my honest opinion, and my honest opinion and view shaped my recommendation. I recommended that we maintain 2,500 troops in Afghanistan. And I also recommended earlier in the fall of 2020 that we maintain 4,500 at that time. Those are my personal views. I also have a view that the withdrawal of those forces would lead inevitably to the collapse of the Afghan military forces and eventually the Afghan government.
What a dirtball that guy is. Did you just hear that? I can't share my recommendation, quote, but here was my recommendation. Take those medals off. You don't deserve them. Until today, the generals and their many allies in government have been undermining Biden indirectly. And far be it for us to defend Joe Biden, who deserves no defense, but it is a defense of the American system, which works well when civilians control the military. Up until today, they have been leaking Biden's phone calls, for example, with the president of Afghanistan. That's illegal, but they did it anyway. They've been giving nasty background quotes to their stenographers at NBC News about what a dope Biden is. All true, but still, they're not allowed to do that. But today was different. Today's performance took place in public. It was on the record and it was under oath. And in that performance, they directly contradicted the commander-in-chief. As a reminder, here's what Joe Biden was saying just a few weeks ago on ABC.
But your top military advisors warned against withdrawing on this timeline. They wanted you to keep about 2,500 troops.
No, they didn't. It was split. That wasn't true. That wasn't true.
They didn't tell you that they wanted troops to stay?
No, not in terms of whether we were going to get out in a time frame, all troops. They didn't argue against that.
So no one told, your military advisors did not tell you, no, we should just keep 2,500 troops. It's been a stable situation for the last several years. We can do that. We can continue to do that.
No, no one said that to me that I can recall.
It's not a defense of any of them. They're all so awful and so undeserving of leading this great country. They should not be in charge of this country. It's too good a country for people like this. So here you have the generals claiming they told Biden the Afghan withdrawal would be a total disaster. Biden, just in the tape you saw, says they did not tell him that. The question is, who's lying? Someone's lying. Joe Biden doesn't know who's lying. He can't remember anything. He doesn't know what he had for lunch. Here's what we know for sure, though, and this is the point of today's hearings, and it's the point that matters going forward. No one in the Pentagon's leadership will ever be held accountable for this, the latest in a very long string of colossal screw-ups that have dramatically reduced American power and prestige around the world and gotten a ton of people killed. No one. This is unbelievable. Let's say you worked at a nuclear power plant, and one day you had too many beers on your lunch break and you fell asleep and the reactor melted down and thousands died. And then you got a massive raise. That's pretty much what's happening here. The House of Representatives just passed a $776 billion defense budget. How big is that? Well, it's fully $24 billion more than even the White House requested. In other words, Congress just threw a little extra for a job well done, a bonus for the generals who left $80 billion worth of American military equipment for the Taliban to use. Good work, guys!
Olá pessoal, tudo bem? Aqui é o Tradutor. Eu tô passando para te avisar que eu tô numa campanha para conseguir pelo menos mais 9 apoiadores até o final do ano. Esse canal não é monetizado, então totalmente depende de você. Eu preciso muito do seu apoio para manter esse canal atualizado e vivo, né, no ar. Os links para apoiar esse nosso projeto estão na descrição desse vídeo e no comentário fixado. Então é muito fácil e muito simples de apoiar. É graças a essas pessoas incríveis que eu posso estar trazendo conteúdo para vocês. E é isso aí, pessoal. Não se esqueçam de deixar seu like, seu comentário e até mais. Fui! Grande abraço.